that's what I want to speak about today, is what do we mean by that different kind of government? And fundamentally, how do we end the secret Scotland we have under the SNP? And to put that bluntly, it means stopping the waste of taxpayers' money, it means releasing the files, and it means following the law. And I'll say more about that in a moment. We also had the devastating report yesterday showing finally some admission of responsibility from the Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board into the infection scandal in Scotland that resulted in the death of at least 2 children. It is probably the most stark example of the consequences of government secrecy, cover-up, and trying to hide the truth rather than embracing it and giving justice to the families. But today I'm also going to address some of the more broader issues that go to the heart of trust in our politics. That culture of secrecy, cover-up, and the waste of taxpayers' money. And before the weekend, we saw once again how John Swinney is willing to use public money to protect the SNP rather than do the right thing by the public, where he has now authorised legal action to block the release of documents linked to the Alex Salmond investigation. That's despite rulings from Scotland's Information Commissioner, and it's despite the Commissioner warning that this legal action has limited prospects of success and risks even more public money. So the public are entitled to ask, what is John Swinney so desperate to hide? What is the secrets that he doesn't want to be made public? And it's part of a wider culture of secrecy and obstruction that's at the heart of this SNP government, where they ignore legal advice, where they use your money to protect themselves, where they lose in court, appeal again, and send the bill to the public. And let's give you just a few examples of those legal bills. £363,000 in legal costs over the Section 35 case. More than £250,000 on the unlawful independence referendum case. Nearly £500,000 on the failed named person scheme. Up to £774,000 in the 4 Women Scotland cases. And £700,000 on the mishandling of the Salmond affair alone. That's all money that could be spent on your schools, your hospitals, and our public services, but instead is being spent on protecting the SNP. And even now, John Swinney refuses to publish the full figures behind the SNP's use of taxpayers' money to protect the SNP. So my message today is simple. Stop fighting the Information Commissioner. Stop wasting public money. Stop the stonewalling. Publish the Alex Salmond files and follow the law. And what I mean by follow the law is we have a stark example of where John Swinney says one thing in Parliament, but his lawyers, paid for by the public, say something else in the courtroom, so they must follow the Equality Act. So if the SNP has nothing to hide, it should release the documents and let the public see the truth. And let me say unequivocally that if elected First Minister, I will publish the Salmond files in full and let the public see what the SNP don't want you to see. Because we need a reset, because secrecy and cover-up has become the default position for this SNP government. And a Scottish Labour government will end Secret Scotland and replace it with open, honest, accountable government. Publish the Salmond files and end the cover-up. We will invite the Information Commissioner to carry out independent review of FY practices with clear recommendations for faster decisions and proper compliance. We will tighten the ministerial code so legal action can only be pursued where there is a stateable case and it passes a clear public interest test. And we will respect the Equality Act and issue clear guidance so the law is followed properly and consistently across public bodies. This is about restoring trust and showing the people that we have a government that works for them, not a government that uses the money to protect its own political party. Scotland can't afford a third decade of the SNP. It can't afford more secrecy and cover-up. It needs better outcomes, but it needs a different kind of government, and that's what I'm determined to deliver. Thank you so much, and we'll open up to some questions. I've asked Jackie to join us in the Q&A part because she lived and breathed every moment of the Salmond inquiry in the last Parliament and can be testament to much of the secrecy and cover-up approach that was taken by the SNP, and in particular by John Swinney, who was the government's representative in terms of supposedly supplying information to that.
The Information Commissioner said the Scottish Government has been disrespectful towards the Scottish public. Do you accept that?
The Government is going to release the information that the Information Commissioner has suggested should be released. But
you told him only minutes before the deadline that you wouldn't. Is that acceptable? He said you were disrespectful. Do you accept that?
The Scottish Government acts fully in compliance with its duties on freedom of information, always has done and always will do. But what's important is that we do so in a fashion that means we do not breach court orders. And I will not have the Government breach court orders that are in place to protect the anonymity of women who have complained in cases of alleged sexual assault. And I think that would be pretty broadly understood as a really important thing for me as First Minister to do, and I will insist upon it.
I'll open up to questions. I'll take Kathleen Nutt first from the Hill.
Thanks very much, Mr Salmond. So, the Scottish Government says that if it released these Salmond files or Nicola Sturgeon files, obviously the evidence to James Hamilton's investigation, it would be in contempt of court by breaching court orders, and that's why it hasn't released the files. What would you say to that argument, and have you or Labour taken any sort of legal advice on this issue that presumably you believe there would not be, this government would not be in contempt of court if it released the files? Thank
you, Kathleen. In actual fact, the one person that has referenced a possible contempt of court here is actually the Information Commissioner, who fears the SNP and actually the Scottish Government, which is even more serious, risk being in contempt of court. It is simply unacceptable that John Swinney believes that public money, hundreds of thousands of pounds of public money, should be spent protecting the SNP, his political party, rather than spent on the public, improving outcomes for people in Scotland. And that's why we will back Scotland's Information Commissioner, we will back openness and transparency, and we'll back a different kind of government, and we will release the Alex Salmond files. I'll take Tom from the Daily Mail.
Thank you. Just on that point, there's a few cases running at once, and the one they're going to court over is about trying to avoid jigsaw identification of complainers in Salmond's criminal trial. They have lifelong anonymity. It's not the sort of thing you can barge into. Are you not picking the wrong fight?
Well, we will of course always want to protect anonymity of victims or potential victims. But let's not pretend the Information Commissioner has not considered these issues either. Scotland's Information Commissioner would not be saying to release files if he had to take in full account of the legal situation and also the individual circumstances for people related to that case. And what we are saying is that the Information Commissioner has made it clear that these files must be released, and he also believes that any case is likely to fail and does not meet the public interest test and risk contempt of court. Why is John Swinney willing to fight the Information Commissioner? What is he trying to hide? And what are the secrets he doesn't want to be made public? Secrets perhaps that has his fingerprints all over them. So we will follow the Scottish Information Commissioner. We will end the misuse of public money, the thousands of pounds that are being spent to hide the truth, and we will end that waste, and we will publish the files, and we will follow the law. I don't know if you want to add anything more, Jackie, as someone that lived and breathed the committee in the last month.
Maybe Swinney just wants to defer to a court so he doesn't get his fingers burned.
Well, or maybe he just wants to hide something, which is why he continues to fight the Scottish Information Commission. Jackie?
And I think we have all heard that excuse time and time again, and subsequent to that, we've had lots of information released by the Scottish Government because the committee had to persist. Now let's just remember here and take a step back. John Swinney is the architect of Secret Scotland. We witnessed him at the committee withholding evidence, obstructing the work of the committee, then saying he released hundreds of pages of evidence, many of which were blank or completely redacted. This is a government that does not want its secrets known. And I think sunlight is the best disinfectant, and the Labour government would ensure that that material is in the public domain as it rightly should be.
But let me just add one other thing to that, which is John Swinney will always put the SNP first and the people of Scotland second. And yes, we have a stark example with the Salmond files, but we have an even starker example where 2 children at least lost their lives to Elizabeth Hospital. And the government chose secrecy, cover,
and trying to hide the truth rather than doing the right thing by those patients and those families. The serious and devastating consequences of an SNP obsession to protect itself above anything else, to waste public money and to hide the truth, frankly, is dangerous, and it shows why we can't risk a third decade of the SNP and John Swinney as First Minister. Crystal,
And I ask a couple of questions, if you don't mind. Firstly, on the Queen Elizabeth and what we heard over the weekend, do you think that Nicola Sturgeon, given that she signed off as Super Hospital and later officially opened it, if she had questions to answer about the development hospital and its build? So that's the first question. And secondly, you're here today, Scottish are making a commitment to transparency and be open with the public. I wonder, in light of the Daily Records reporting at the end of last week from Pam Clancy, whether she would now have the whip withdrawn by Labour.
Thank you. Let me take the second point first, Chris, which is I was really clear about the commitments and the reassurances that I needed and the Scottish Labour Party needed in terms of Pam Clancy. I think it's safe to say those reassurances to which we would wanted didn't go to the extent we would have liked, and she is not a candidate and will not be fighting the next election. So we are really clear and robust about that. On the serious point of the Queen Elizabeth, because I think it's important not to pretend they're of equivalence, because I'm not saying it was not a legit profession, of course it is. But on the Queen Elizabeth, let's think about what's happened for 7 years. For 7 years, the government, many ministers within the government, one minister I would probably exclude from that is probably Jean Freeman, to be fair to her. I think we did have positive engagement with Jean Freeman. But the SNP government, including Nicola Sturgeon, including other senior ministers, as well as the leadership of the Health Board, for 7 years, lied, didn't tell the truth, lied to parents about what really happened to their children, lied to families about what was the true scale of the issue at the Queen Elizabeth, bullied staff, made life difficult for them at work, and told everyone that it was all made up and there was nothing to see here. For 7 years. And now at the last moment in the inquiry, they've accepted some guilt. And I think that this is the biggest scandal in the history of the Scottish Parliament. I think it is criminal. And I think not just the former chief executives, former chairs, and key managers at the Health Board and at the hospital at the time, but I also think senior ministers at the time need to be investigated so we can get to the truth about why this cover-up happened, who was part of the cover-up, and that they face the full consequences of that cover-up in any criminal investigation. Because we've got to make it really clear that we're not going to accept this, and it can never ever happen again in public life, or indeed in the private sector, to be honest, in Scotland ever again. So you want to add, Jackie, just from our Queen Elizabeth perspective at all?
No, nothing to add to that. I think the families who have been so badly affected deserve a robust outcome to this public inquiry, and I do think Nicola Sturgeon has questions to answer. It was the case that she hurried up completion of the building when it wasn't safe to open.
And there's a few more days of testimony to go at the inquiry, and we'll have more to say towards the end of the week around some of the findings from the inquiry, which we'll speak about the next steps in terms of how we want to support the families and get justice going forward. Mark, that is Mark, and yes, I'll take Mark first. Can I come back to you, John? Sorry.
Good morning, both. As much as we've got a lot of the information, Commissioner, why do you trust an ombudsman effectively with a very small budget by his own admission over the government with all of their lawyers who say this will be contempt of court? On a kind of related matter, the UK government has shelved the Accountability Act over its efforts to exempt security services. So there's at least an acknowledgement that the other tier of your party that there must be some exemptions in transparency. And on a final point, can you reflect on the poll yesterday as they come back on?
You want to go first, Jackie?
Yes, we would never do anything that compromised jigsaw identification. Absolutely not. But I am very clear that this was used as an excuse by the government throughout the Salmond inquiry, and it was used inappropriately. Now, I trust the Information Commissioner to have considered the information, and frankly, I know this morning that Fergus Ewing, former SNP Cabinet Minister, has supported our proposals. If anybody knows how secret SNP Scotland operates, it's him.
And let me just say, Mark, you posed the question as who you trust. I have no reason to mistrust the Information Commissioner, who is taking on his role in an independent capacity and making his recommendations and his demands of government.
Well, it's not
But
about
I
trust
have-
though, it's
but
about,
I
it's
have
about
every
expertise. It's expertise that I'm
Yeah,
questioning.
but I have-
As an ombudsman's lawyer, better than a team of
But I have
lawyers.
every reason to mistrust John Swinney. For 20 years, this man has been at the heart of a culture of secrecy, cover-up and a lack of transparency. It's the way he worked in his political party, it's the way he worked when he was in government, it's the way he leads his political party, and it's the way he leads his government. So if you're asking me head on, who do I trust? Scotland's Information Commissioner, the person that the public pay to be independent and to make demands on the transparency of government, or the person who's made a career out of lying to the public and protecting his own party and putting the party before the country? I'm going to trust Scotland's Information Commissioner. And that's why we will not challenge the Information Commissioner, and we will release the files and stop wasting thousands of pounds of money in the process. On the point you make about accountability, I'm really clear that yes, we do have a duty of candour in Scotland, but let's be honest, the law does not go far enough. Right now we have a system that is there to protect the system and not stand up for the victim. And that's why we will introduce Millie's Law, and we will make sure that the weight of justice is on the side of the victim, not on the side of the system. And that will be an early commitment of any incoming Scottish Labour government, and of course we'll say a lot more about Millie's Law in the coming weeks. And on the poll, it shows its progress, but we've got to keep going. And what is very clear from that poll, but also what's happening out in our communities, is there is only one party competing with the SNP to try and change the government. Reform are creating noise, but they can't win. Only one person is challenging John Swinney to be First Minister of this country, and only one party is challenging the SNP to beat them and change the government of this country, and that's Scottish Labour. And I'm absolutely determined that this is an election we will win, because our country needs better outcomes, but it also needs a different kind of government, which is demonstrated by what we're chatting about this morning. And I think you had a follow-up, Tom, that I'll take.
Yeah, it's just sort of jumping off on what Jackie said. Queen Elizabeth was, a massive project for the SNP. Nicola Sturgeon promised it as Health Secretary. It got open when she was First Minister, and this hospital for her constituency, constituents rather. And of course, 2015 was a general election. Do you believe there was political pressure from the government to the health board to get this thing opened, PDQ, and that?
I think bluntly, yes, Tom. And I've shared with you and other journalists before the damning water report that was produced weeks before that hospital was opened. And that damning report said that the water was not safe and there was a high risk of infection and therefore a high risk of danger to life. And someone, at least one person, I would contest, a group of people, will have saw that piece of paper and decided to put it under the desk rather than on the table and in the public domain. And I'm not willing to believe that no minister ever saw it, or that no chief executive ever saw it, or that no chair of the health board ever saw it. I simply do not believe that to be the truth. And it goes back to the point I'm making, that this is a government that will do what it thinks is best for its party, not what is best for its country. Any minister, any chief executive, or any chair of a health board that just days before a hospital opened received a report to say that it was not safe, that it was high risk of infection, and therefore high risk to life, but chose to put it under the desk and ignore it, is simply criminal. And that's why I think ministers, former chief executives, and chairs should be investigated for that criminal.
Do you think political convenience essentially put let people's debt?
I think putting party before country has had devastating consequences for families that relied on that hospital. So to put bluntly, yes, I think this is criminal. I think it is the biggest act of sabotaging failure in the history of the Scottish Parliament. And ministers, former chief executives and former chairs have to be held criminally accountable.
Sorry, just logically on from that, when this investigation has run its course, do you expect people to be in jail?
This is criminal. I want criminal. There is a criminal investigation. I don't want to put any doubt on that criminal investigation. But children have died here. Children have died. The parents have been lied to. The public's been lied to. And someone or a group of people chose to ignore that devastating report that said there was a high risk of infection and a high risk to life. But they chose to open the hospital anyway. I think that's criminal. And if a court of law decides that means someone goes to jail, then I think that might be very fair punishment.
Conceivably ministers?
I think ministers have to be part of that criminal investigation because they have to be held accountable for their failures. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
There's still clips on, so if you have a student yourself.